Today we've got the Chevelle back in the hole, as we call it. We've got the car in epoxy and metalwork is done. We had to do fairly extensive metalwork to make the gaps right and make everything fit, but we got her all on there. Panel to panel is pretty good, as you can see. We've set it all up, we've bent the edges out, and everything lines up pretty well. So right now we're getting ready to start blocking on this, and we'll go over kind of how to prep this for filler and the process that we start with when we start filler work. So this car's been stripped. It has DPLV 50 and then CRE 921 on top of that. So when we start burning through the CRE, we will see the gray of the DP 50 before we hit bare metal, and we'll know that we should stop sanding before we hit bare metal. We will probably hit bare metal here and there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those areas are high. Sometimes that metal's just in the right spot. So our goal is to not put filler over metal, and we're gonna block this down with 150 and just get a map of where our dings and dents are, where our waves are, our panel to panel, what needs to be done there. So as you can see, we started blocking this, got a bit of a map. Obviously our panel to panel areas are the worst. You know, we've got, this is low, it's a little low over here, it's low, it's low. Most of this and this whole door is gonna end up getting skimmed. As you can see, there's a big low right here. It's dense, sporadic, little dings and dents sporadically spread throughout the door. So most of this is going to get skimmed because it's not real straight, especially the panel to panel area. And as you can see in this is an aftermarket quarter on this car, and in this groove, this line flows real good until right here, and then it really V's. And so that's gonna have to all get addressed all the way down this quarter. A few little dings along here, probably from when they put the quarter on. We didn't put the quarters on this car, but I would say they were put on fairly well as far as the quality of the way they were put on. And going into that, up here, this is, when we stripped this car, this is what we found, and we left it because this is the way we would have done it too. They spot welded this quarter on, and then they welded the seam solid to the roof, and that's the best way to do this to prevent cracking. Some people would put lead in here. We don't like to use lead. Lead is big problems usually. Almost every time I've stripped lead, I've found rust underneath of it. So what we do is we weld it solid like this, we get it in epoxy, we prep this, and then we use Duraglass, fiberglass filler over this, and then we start blocking. So being that we're going to glaze this door and skim basically this and most of this side, all these low spots got to get prepped for filler. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a DA with some 80, and we're gonna try to not burn through the primer. We just wanna sand it really well before we go putting filler on this. So now that I've got this area prepped, I typically start with doing my panel to panel, and then I work my way each way. So now that I've got this area prepped, what I like to do is do one side of the gap at a time. I will take, not that piece of tape, I will take this and I'll actually just tape this gap shut. I'll just kind of try to get that tape in there just to the inside of this gap. I'm not so concerned about the edge yet. That kind of comes, crispening this edge up will come after our panel to panel is established. So basically what I'm gonna do now is, now that this is masked, I can do my filler in this area. I'm not gonna spread filler down this whole quarter yet. I wanna get my panel to panel established, so I'm gonna fill roughly a foot out, and then I'm gonna pull this tape, and then once this dries, I'll lightly block the high ridges out of it, and then we'll do it the other way. We'll tape on this, we'll filler on the door, we'll tape these off, and then as this is drying, I'll come up here and start prepping this, get some filler on one side of this, come back, sand this, we'll put filler here. We want to get to a point where we're not just sitting here waiting for filler to dry. This is dry, we're gonna sand this while that's drying, etc., etc. So right now we're getting ready to mix up some Platinum Select. This is 3M Platinum Select. This is the filler that we like to use. Platinum Plus is pretty good filler too. This stuff spreads a little better. It seems to sand a little better. So when we do this, we're mixing 50 to 1, 2% harder. So 0 the scale. I'm gonna mix, to do what I am gonna do there, I'm gonna mix probably maybe 200 grams. And if you're 0.1 off, like I'm at 199.8, probably close enough for filler. So I'm gonna call that 200. We're gonna 0 that. So for every 50 grams, we put 1 gram. So 200 grams, we're gonna put 4 grams of hardener in this. So 4 grams of hardener. And I've got a little bit of a spreadsheet right here to kind of guide you guys through that. So just a few different mix options there. So when I mix this filler, I'm kneading it like dough. I'm not stirring it, I'm kneading it back and forth, kind of folding it over itself, trying to work those air pockets out of it so that you have less pinholes, even though you will always have pinholes in filler. I don't care if it says it's the world's first pinhole-free filler. But when I start spreading, I put a nice tight coat down to begin with. We want to push this filler down into those scratches. That's where we get our adhesion. So kind of just lather it on there, push it down over the whole area that you think you're about to spread. Make sure it's gonna stick good. And then what I like to do is kind of come in and just build it a little bit. Just put a little more on there, get a little bit of a build going over top of your nice tight coat. And then at this point, I've got a shape. This is basically flat, and right at the door, it's kind of like a Camaro. Right after the door, it starts to come back out. So I'm gonna take a linear spreader, and I'm gonna try to just get it to contour to this shape real nicely. And as you can see right here, I don't have enough filler there. So what I'm gonna do, take my other spreader, take my excess off of here. I'm gonna put that excess right there. You have, it's about 70 degrees in here right now, and I'm mixing 50 to 1. I've probably got 4 or 5 minutes of work time. So don't think that you have to be in a huge hurry unless it's, 95 degrees outside. But right now I've got this pretty good. I got a little bit down here that's just a tiny bit low. I'm just gonna kind of come in and with a smaller spreader, just touch that up a little bit. Something like that. Then I'm gonna come in and basically I'm gonna start to feather this. I don't want a big line right here because that's where I'm gonna start feathering my filler into all of this that right here that doesn't need filler. So I'm gonna end with a tight coat. We're gonna go from a build to a tight coat on the outside. Kind of build this up a little bit on my spreader. And I'm gonna try to get a really nice spread for this last bit. I'm pretty satisfied with that. Now I'm gonna come in and just knock my lines down with a smaller one. Then once I'm satisfied, I'm gonna pull this tape, but I'm gonna pull it almost at 180 degrees and cut that filler, cut that wet filler. And now, as you can see, I've got a little bit of a jaggedness because that filler rolled into the gap. A lot of times I'll just take my spreader and just kind of push that back up where I want it. So now I have blocked this for the first time. I used a 32-inch flex throughout this entire area from the wheel opening back to roughly here. And as you can see, I've got some issues still. We've fixed a lot of things, but what we're gonna do now is take a number 2 pencil, only a number 2 pencil. This is graphite. This is basically the same thing your guide coat is made of. You don't wanna use a pen, marker, anything with ink. Crayons, nothing like that. So number 2 pencil only. We're gonna come in and mark where our lows are. So I got a low here. This is all kind of faintly low. Got a low here, a couple things through here. This is low through here. And obviously the more spreads I put on this, the farther out I'm gonna start dragging this. So before I spread more on here, I'm gonna prep this, because as you can see, this through here has got the same issue that we have on the quarter panel in the back. With this aftermarket panel, this roll from here to here is a lot sharper than it is the rest of the way through. So we got to fill all this type of stuff in too. So what we do is map this out with the number 2 pencil. Then I'm going to come in with my hand with some 80 grit and prep these areas. And the reason we mark these is because once I prep these, I'll lose my map. So I want to mark those areas, prep the areas that I'm going to lose when I go to prep this for the next coat of filler. So I'm going to prep this and get my next coats of filler on here before I start blocking this, so that this filler is drying while I'm sanding this filler. So now I've got my door defender kind of on a good roll. I've got filler on there. I've blocked that down. I've put more filler on. While that's drying, I'm going to come and start doing my panel to panel back here. And the whole purpose of panel to panel is we're blocking this from one panel to the next. We're making this transition seamless. When you look down the side, you won't see any variation between the quarter and the door anywhere along this entire thing. So when I look down the side, the door won't stick out farther than the quarter, or the quarter won't stick out farther than the door along the entire seam. And that's the whole purpose of panel to panel. And you are going to end up with filler on both sides most of the time, but the key is to not have much. The skimming process, everyone freaks out when they see a car covered in filler, but they don't realize that a lot of that is a 1/16 of an inch thick, maybe less, sometimes more, but usually minimal filler. So that's what we're shooting for here. That's why we do our metal work, and we bring these edges out to try to match each other as best we can before we start filler work. Otherwise, in an area like this, if my fender was in farther than my door and I just filled it, when I open the door's gonna hit the fender, it's gonna take paint off, it's gonna break filler off, it's gonna do lots of bad stuff. And back here, when you open the door, you don't want to see a thick edge. You want a nice, thin, factory appearing edge. So now that I've got my initial panel to panel blocking in this area, you can see on the door I've got a few low spots, got a couple. This from here over is just slightly low. The rest of it is pretty decent, except for I got a line there, a little something down here. So this is close enough. Once I get this close with filler, a lot of times I switch to glaze. Glaze sands easier, it spreads nicer, dries faster. So now I'm gonna glaze even farther out. I'm gonna glaze out to in here, and I'll do the same into the door. The door I'll probably keep using filler because I've got a lot of waviness right in the middle that I haven't addressed yet. But once I get things close, the rest of this quarter is decent except for that little line under the body line. So now I'm gonna go to glaze on this. So when we switch to glaze, the glaze we use is the U-Pole Dolphin glaze. Part number is UP0714. This is also mixed 50-1 with their hardener. They have a red hardener. I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. It's all benzoyl peroxide. That's why they call it BPO hardener, but you should probably just stick to what they tell you to use. I have, in a pinch, used the blue hardener in this and it worked fine. But in a perfect world, you want to use what they tell you to use. So, same thing when I do this, I'm going to put a tight coat on my whole area. And this stuff is a lot more watery. It's going to spread better. It's going to get down in the scratches easier, fill pinholes, things like that. But I'm going to basically just kind of lather it all on there. And the reason I'm glazing this entire piece and not just where my lows are is a lot of times you will actually you'll have better luck. You'll get it done faster. You'll get it straighter, faster by reskimming the whole area. So now I've got my filler spread on the door, blocked it out, and it's pretty decent. I've got a bit of a low spot through here, one there, one over there. It's kind of sporadic, slightly low spots. So now I'm gonna move on and I'm gonna glaze this door and this fender, and then we're gonna block this whole side, all panel to panel as one. Now that this is all really close, once I get that glaze on there, we're gonna start really fine tuning this. And the way that I usually do this is pick a section, you know, this panel to panel up to there, this section, I'm gonna get it done in 80 grit. And then I'll go down to the rocker and the bottom of the door and down into here, kind of blend this all together. And then I generally, just like we did here, we had wet filler while we're sanding that. I'll generally move one way, put some more filler on, go sand filler up there, and eventually me and Ryan meet in the middle somewhere. So Ryan's been working on this side, same procedure. He's fillering, doing some panel to panel blocking. He's kind of taking each step out a little farther. He's not quite as far as I am on his side, but same process. Now, if you watch that time lapse, you saw that I actually had two separate boards full of glaze. So the reason that is if I put roughly it's about 450 grams of glaze on this door. If I would have tried to do all of that at once, it probably would have got hard on me by the time I was done, and I would have had a problem keeping that all on my mix board. So I started with 200 and then I did another 150. So I had 350 grams of glaze on this door. So U-Pole Dolphin glaze 50-1. I mixed two mixes. I started on this end, worked it towards the middle, and then started with the next mix. And while the first mix was still a little wet, you work that edge in and continue on. So like you can see right now, this side is actually more shiny than this side because that side is drying. As it dries, you'll see this start getting less and less shiny over here. So there we go. We've got most of this side, what they call flooded or floated, which is where we skim everything with glaze. So I've got it fairly close with my filler work, went onto the glaze, and yes, there's lines in it and whatnot. I just spread it. But if you look down it, at this point, you can see it won't take a whole lot to make this look really nice and straight. So that is the way that I do panel to panel, and that's, I guess, the most efficient way that I found to do panel to panel.